Hey guys, it's Comic Central here, and today we're going to be looking at the history of a very cool character, pun intended. Today we are looking at the history of Mr. Freeze. Mr. Freeze's first appearance was in Batman 121 of February 1959, and was named the character Mr. Zero, instead of the new name that we know and love today. It was in Detective Comics 373 in March of 1968 that he was named Mr. Freeze, and his name was changed because of the 1960s Batman series. Mr. Freeze was created by David Wood, Sheldon Moldoff, and Bob Kane. Sorry for any pronunciation errors in those names. In the pre-crisis continuity, Mr. Freeze is explained as being a rogue scientist whose idea and design for an ice gun backfired. This made cryogenic chemicals get spilled on him, making him need sub-zero temperatures in order to survive. After the crisis event, which means the post-crisis continuity, Mr. Freeze was reinvented, and he had a similar backstory to the one created by Paul Dini for Batman the Animated Series. Dr. Victor Freeze, PhD, was an amazing cryogenicist. Even as a child, Victor was interested by cryogenics, so he began his strange hobby of freezing animals. His parents were horrified by this interest, and because of this, sent him to a strict boarding school, where Victor was miserable and felt like he was detached from humanity. When Victor got to college, he met a woman named Nora, who he fell in love with and later married. A year and a half after Nora contracts a fatal sickness, Victor works on a freeze ray for GothCorp. Victor's boss, Ferris Boyle, decided to tell some thugs about the gun Victor was working on, leading Batman to create a team that was capable of making Ferris do his job better. Victor made a choice to use this device that he had created to put Nora in cryostasis. Victor's boss interferes with his research and tampers with it. This resulted in an explosion that killed Nora, but luckily Victor survived. The chemicals that Victor was exposed to from the freeze ray lowered his body temperature to the point where he had to wear a cryogenic suit in order to survive. Victor declares revenge on the people responsible for his wife's death and becomes Mr. Freeze. This is the first supervillain that Batman faces as well in the post-crisis continuity. Batman's operatives find Mr. Freeze and he shoots one of them with his freeze gun. Eventually, Batman apprehends him though. Mr. Freeze's crimes often involve him freezing everyone and everything that he comes across, so he never forms alliances with other supervillains and criminals in Gotham City, and much more prefers working alone. On rare occasions, he has worked with other characters though. However, he usually just acts as an enforcer for mob bosses such as Black Mask and the Penguin. Mr. Freeze has also teamed up with Hush before to make cryogenic machines so Hush may take revenge on Batman in the future. Mr. Freeze's technology allows Hush to preserve Catwoman's surgically removed heart as a way of threatening Batman as well. When Mr. Freeze was a part of the secret society of supervillains, he creates a Sub-Zero machine for Nysa Al Ghul in exchange for the use of her Lazarus Pit. He then attempts to bring Nora back to life without waiting for the adjustments needed in the pool of chemicals to achieve the said task. Nora doesn't come back to life as the person that Mr. Freeze anticipated though, and she came back to life as Lazara, and she escapes. She blames Mr. Freeze for her unfortunate situation and breaks the relationship with him. During the New 52, the Court of Owls sends assassins to kill 40 important citizens across the whole of Gotham City, one of these citizens being Mr. Freeze. Red Hood, Arsenal, and Starfire do choose to save him though. After they've done so, they hand him over into Batgirl's custody. The first annual for Batman in the New 52 awards Mr. Freeze with a new origin story. In this continuity, Mr. Freeze's fascination of cryogenics began when he was a child, and his mother fell through the ice of a frozen-over lake. If you're wondering why they were there on the lake, it was because him and his mother were going to build a snowman. The freezing water and ice preserved her body long enough for help to arrive and save her. This sparked his fascination with cryogenics and the cold. It was later revealed this accident left his mother in constant pain and needed a wheelchair. Victor ended his mother's pain and suffering by pushing her into the same hole that she originally fell into, killing her. Also, in this new origin story, Nora was never Mr. Freeze's wife, and her true name was Nora Fields, and she was born in 1943. When Nora was aged 23 years, she was diagnosed with an incurable heart disease, so her family placed her under new technology of cryogenic stasis, hoping that a cure would arrive in the future. Mr. Freeze wrote his doctoral thesis on Nora and took a job as a cryogenic researcher and technician at Wayne Enterprises. The reason why he took this job here is because this is where Nora's cryogenic body was held. Freeze ended up falling in love with her and became dedicated to finding the solution to releasing her out of the cryogenic stasis, something that would slowly thaw out of cryogenic subjects. Bruce Wayne ordered the subject to be shut down, as he was not okay with what Victor was up to. This angered Victor heavily, so he threw a chair at Bruce, who dodged the projectile, which caused the chair to smash into some cryogenic chemical tanks. The contents of these tanks sprayed onto Victor and transformed him into Mr. Freeze. His eyes still need the warmth though, so he wears thermal goggles to combat this. The Court of Owls uses Mr. Freeze's cryogenic thaw formula to revive the dormant Talons and then attempt to kill Mr. Freeze. He survives but is captured by Red Hood and sent to Arkham Asylum. He then escapes shortly afterward and rearms himself with help from the Penguin. Mr. Freeze decides to attempt to kill Bruce Wayne and take Nora back for himself and leave Gotham City behind. Mr. Freeze infiltrates Wayne Enterprises and has a short fight with Nightwing and Damian Wayne, who of course is Robin, but Mr. Freeze subdues them both. Next, Freeze is asked to go to the penthouse by Bruce Wayne, where he finds Batman and Nora in her cryogenic state. Batman defeats Mr. Freeze by injecting him with the thawing formula. Because of this, Mr. Freeze didn't get to revive Nora from suspended animation. In the Forever Evil storyline, Mr. Freeze appears as a member of the secret society of supervillains at the time when the crime syndicate arrived from their world. Scarecrow visits Mr. Freeze to tell him that there is a war happening at Blackgate. The Man-Bats are then able to bring the remaining Talons to Mr. Freeze after Man-Bat and Scarecrow steal them from Bane and from Blackgate. Mr. Freeze and Clayface later engage the Rogues in their territory. Mr. Freeze tells Mirror Master that he is not interested in claiming the bounty on their heads. Mr. Freeze then uses Weather Wizard to create the best conditions for him to be able to freeze Gotham. As the Rogues are fighting Clayface and Mr. Freeze, Black Mask arrives with his False Face Society to capture the Rogues and claim their bounty on their heads. Mr. Freeze themes his crimes like most Batman villains, and he themes them around the cold and ice. His powers consist of Sub-Zero physiology, meaning that he must live in Sub-Zero temperatures to survive, cold adaptation and is immune to Sub-Zero temperatures, de-accelerated aging and toxic immunity. His abilities consist of genius-level intellect, skilled in cryogenics, skilled medical scientist, and is multilinguistic, and can speak English, German, Greek, and Italian. Mr. Freeze can also project ice and cold from his freeze ray. In the Underworld Unleashed storyline, the demon named Neron gives Mr. Freeze the power to create Sub-Zero temperatures without needing his freeze gun or his suit. However, after an encounter in Central Park with Green Lantern, Donna Troy, and Purgatory, he reverted back to his normal Mr. Freeze state. He then gained new Sub-Zero armor and weaponry. Mr. Freeze has appeared in live action in Batman and Robin, which is everyone's favourite comic book movie, played by Arnold Schwarzenegger. He is also set to appear in the DCEU if we look at the opening sequence from Wonder Woman and Justice League. He also appeared in the Batman 1966 series played by Otto Preminger. Mr. Freeze also appeared in both the Batman animated series as well as in the Arkham games. Mr. Freeze has also had many appearances in other animated shows and games, such as in Injustice 2 and the show called The Batman. And that just about does it for this video. I hope you guys did enjoy, and with that said, I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.